Ukraine is actively supplying cheap iPhones and MacBooks to Russia. The devices first arrive in Poland, then go to Belarus, and from there to Russia. Such devices are significantly cheaper than market prices. For example, a new iPhone 17 costs 5 to 7,000 rubles less than the usual price, and MacBooks are 15,000 rubles cheaper. The world is much more complicated than many people think, and any seller who wants to make a profit will find loopholes and so on. And the fact that devices from Ukraine end up in Russia, well, that's no surprise. This news is being presented as follows. Investors were not enthusiastic about Ferrari's release of an electric car. The company has launched its first electric vehicle, Louvre, developed in collaboration with Apple designer Johnny Ive. And in this article, a chart is provided showing how Ferrari's shares have dropped. Well, let's put it this way. They dropped for 1 or 2 days, and now, this is old news, about a week old, they've already bounced back and are doing very well. I'm skeptical about electric cars. To me, any electric car is more of a device than a car, no matter how paradoxical that may sound. I prefer cars with internal combustion engines, but considering that I live in Russia and we have harsh winters and vast distances, well, electric cars. Here, in our conditions, an electric car just becomes unappealing. If it's some kind of hybrid, then yes, but otherwise, not yet. What's happening with electric cars around the world? Well, BYD still remains the giant right now. According to the latest news, it has surpassed Tesla. In Europe, the US and China, electric cars seem to be quite popular. The Louvre has been robbed again, and this time it was done by its own guides. For years, they took Chinese tourists around on a single group ticket and made 10 million euros from it. The scheme ran for 10 years. The guides would take groups of Chinese tourists through the museum dozens of times on just one ticket. In this way, the scammers managed to take up to 20 groups a day through the museum. The security guards took bribes and turned a blind eye to it. The scammers managed to buy apartments in France and Dubai. When they were arrested, the authorities found 1 million euros in cash, luxury cars, and safe deposit boxes filled with valuables. I've always wondered who keeps that kind of money, 1 million euros in cash. It's always been very interesting to me. As for the Louvre, we will most likely hear a lot more news and learn about different fraud schemes because after the latest robbery, it's being thoroughly investigated. Russia's external public debt has exceeded $60 billion for the first time since 2006. As of February 1st, 2026, the public debt reached $61.097 billion, which happened for the first time since 2006. Russia's finance minister Anton Silvanov stated that Russia's public debt should not exceed 20% of GDP. This is an advantage of the Russian economy. I completely agree with him on this point. American tech manufacturers are considering switching to Chinese chips. How did that happen, I wonder? Chinese unicorn companies founded since 2010 are now generating $706 billion in annual profit. However, there is not a single public company in China with a market capitalization exceeding $1 trillion. Although the private company ByteDance might be an exception, that's TikTok for those who don't know. This gap, however, may narrow in the long term. Everyone understands perfectly well that the American market is just so overbought, and if you compare all the companies worldwide, in Russia, China, India, to the American ones, they lag far behind, and the market is simply seen as a goldmine for investments. But it's not also clear-cut because US geopolitics brings its own adjustments and perspectives. That's why the American market is so expensive, and for the most part, investors put their money there, not into the Russian, Chinese, Indian, Brazilian, or other markets. Russia lags far behind developed countries, as well as China and Brazil, in the prevalence of credit cards. Economists believe the reason is not the mentality of borrowers, but regulatory barriers. I don't know who these economists are. Here they're relying on the company DRTX Deltoil in Russia. But let's be honest, if my credit card had an interest rate of at least 15%, I'll only use a credit card if they give me a high limit, but they don't give a high limit on the card. The interest rate on the credit card itself can be 60 or even 70%. Obviously, any reasonable, intelligent person, as long as their head is working, will just go and they'll take out a loan at 15% per year, or back when it was cheaper, at 20% per year. For example, I have a loan at 10% per year. But at the time when I took out the loan at 10% per year, my credit card was offering 43 or 47%. Well, let's say even 43. But I'm a reasonable person, right? And it's the same for everyone. And it's not about mentality, it's about what our banks are doing, some kind of nonsense with credit cards. After several years of investing in electric vehicles, American auto giants such as General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis have announced write-offs totaling more than $50 million, according to the Wall Street Journal. In 2025, electric vehicle sales in the US dropped by 30% in the fourth quarter. Well, damn, these are just boring numbers, blah, 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 blah. And here's the point. Stellantis, which owns brands like Jeep, Opel, Peugeot, Chrysler, Fiat, and others, suffered the largest write-offs, $26 billion. The company's CEO noted that they had overestimated the pace of the energy transition, which is exactly what I was talking about earlier. For example, here in Russia, electric vehicles are for now just for show and bragging rights. You can't really travel long distances in one. Meanwhile, the Chinese market continues to grow. In 2025, the Chinese company BYD surpassed Tesla for the first time, becoming the world's largest supplier of electric vehicles, delivering over 1 million cars outside of China, which is twice as many as Tesla. BYD is actually a really impressive company. They're becoming practically a global monopoly. They're building and setting up huge factories, schools, ships, and I wouldn't be surprised if they become, well, they're already a mega corporation, but they'll become something even bigger, just a true giant. By 2030, the cost of servicing a single customer using artificial intelligence may exceed $3, which is more expensive than the services of live operators hired overseas. While artificial intelligence does not require a salary and does not face sick leave or vacations, its cost is rising due to increasing expenses for data centers, data processing, and the complexity of algorithms. According to Gartner's forecasts, by 2028, some countries will introduce laws requiring companies to retain or hire new operators. Let's just think logically. The market will move toward profit. Once the hype around artificial intelligence dies down and it stops being supposedly cool and trendy, all companies will start counting their profits. And according to this article, we see that the profit generated by an ordinary human worker is greater for the company than that from trendy artificial intelligence. So we don't need to worry for another 50 years. There will be enough work for all of us, working at factories and so on. They rolled out the chart of a collapsed IT company's stock after it entered the artificial intelligence field. Well, artificial intelligence, I see it as a big, currently overinflated bubble because all we see are just funny videos, but as for usefulness, so far, unfortunately, it hasn't brought any. Yes, there are agents like ChatGPT, DeepSeek, GROQ, and so on that help, but for now, their assistance is quite minimal. The gold reserves held by individuals in India surpass the total reserves of the 10 largest central banks in the world. I can believe this news, but there's one thing I'm curious about. How pure is this gold compared to the reserves of central banks? What if this gold is mixed with copper or some other metal? Russia may return to settlements in dollars. The Kremlin has prepared a proposal for broad economic partnership with the administration of US President Donald Trump, which in particular provides for Russia's return to settlements in dollars. There is some kind of deal going on between the US and Russia, or rather, it's probably not even a deal anymore. Most likely, they've already agreed on everything. And it's clear that between the US and Russia, well, it probably makes more sense to settle accounts in US dollars after all. But here another question arises. Won't our country end up turning back toward the dollar again? The largest flight search engine, Aviasales, has been put up for sale. The estimated value of the company is over 23 billion rubles. Potential buyers could include major banks, but one of the obstacles to the deal is the complex ownership structure of the business and the presence of foreign assets. And immediately, the next piece of news. The company has stated that no negotiations are underway and no sale is being prepared. But since this news has come out, most likely there have been some rumors, some leads, someone asked someone somewhere, someone showed some interest, and most likely Aviasales will end up being put up for sale after all. I wouldn't be surprised if some giant company buys it and eventually just takes it public through an IPO.